It was supposed to be just another routine day at Brown's training camp. A few drills, a couple overthrows, some quarterback reps to settle the depth chart debate. But what unfolded on that sweltering Ohio practice field was anything but routine, because in the middle of the quiet rep rotation, Dillon Gabriel, the projected QB2 turned dark horse favorite, lost everything. His temper, his composure, and, oh yeah, his job. Now, you might be wondering what could push a young quarterback to blow up in front of teammates, coaches, and God knows how many rolling cameras. If you're into the real story and all the messy twists they don't show on highlight reels, go ahead and subscribe. And if you're sticking around to see how this Browns QB chaos plays out, you should definitely be subscribed. But that's exactly what makes this moment so telling. Because what started as a petty outburst turned into a psychological unraveling that exposed not just Dillon Gabriel, but the entire Browns quarterback situation for what it really is. Unstable, political, and barely held together with athletic tape. Let's rewind. Coming into training camp, the energy in Cleveland was tense. You had Shedeur Sanders, the flashy draft pick whose every move was under a microscope, thanks to both his talent and his last name. Then you had Dillon Gabriel. More traditional, more quiet, more palatable for the coaching staff. A guy who fit the mold. A guy who played the game the right way. Or so everyone thought. The quarterback reps were being split on paper. But anyone watching closely could see where this was headed. Shedeur had it. The presence. The poise. The calm under pressure. Coaches weren't just testing his arm. They were testing his aura. And it showed. Teammates started gravitating toward him. Defense guys fist-bumping after huddle calls. Receivers subtly lining up a little sharper when he was under center. And Dillon? He felt it. You could see it on his face. Every time Shedeur completed a tight window throw, Gabriel's jaw clenched just a little tighter. Every time the crowd on the sidelines gave Shedeur a nod or a cheer, Gabriel's eyes scanned the coaches, looking for reassurance. So when that one rep came, the tension finally exploded. Shedeur was up next, set to take reps with the first team. Gabriel, standing off to the side, suddenly stormed toward the offensive line mid-rotation and barked something that stopped everyone cold. You're giving him my reps? This dude hasn't earned sh*T. The field went dead silent. Coaches froze. Players looked at each other, not sure if this was some performance art or a genuine detonation. And then Gabriel doubled down. He's only here because of his daddy. Let's stop pretending. Now, let's be honest. There are outbursts in training camp every year. Hot tempers. Scrappy fights. People get in each other's faces. But this was different. This wasn't about competition. This was desperation. Gabriel didn't just challenge the depth chart. He tried to publicly humiliate Shedeur in front of the team. And what made it all the more surreal was Shedeur's response. Because he didn't yell back. He didn't step forward. He didn't even raise his voice. He just stood there, calm, composed, unbothered. The kind of silence that makes everyone else in the room rethink their whole personality. And you could see it happen in real time. The team began to shift. Heads turned away from Gabriel and toward Shedeur. Not because he said anything, but because he didn't have to. That was the moment. The exact moment the team realized who the real leader was. Because in the NFL, leadership isn't about how loud you get when you're pissed off. It's about how still you can be when chaos is aimed directly at your chest. Gabriel, realizing that his meltdown wasn't landing the way he'd hoped, tried to rally himself back. You all see it. He's a brand, not a quarterback. But now it was just awkward. He wasn't calling out injustice. He was exposing his own insecurities. Because the truth is, Shedeur had earned those reps. His reads were sharper. His command of the huddle was stronger. And unlike Gabriel, he wasn't unraveling every time the pressure turned up a notch. In that instant, it was like the Browns' locker room collectively blinked and said, yeah, this guy's not built for it. What followed was swift. Practice resumed. Gabriel was pulled from reps. He didn't return to the field that day, or any day after. 2 days later, his locker was cleared. The team called it mutual, but we all know what that means. He imploded. And the franchise couldn't afford to let that kind of energy linger, not when the quarterback room was already under scrutiny. And Shedeur, he kept it moving. No posturing, no sly comments, just back to work, reading defenses, throwing ropes, earning respect the way his father taught him, not by demanding it, but by showing up when it matters most. This moment didn't just mark the fall of Dillon Gabriel. It marked the birth of Shedeur Sanders as the face of the Cleveland Browns. Because now, no one could question his toughness, his maturity, his right to be there. And ironically, it was Gabriel's tantrum that certified it. And let's talk about the subtext here, because it matters. Gabriel's outburst wasn't just about reps. It was about resentment. Resentment that Shedeur had a name that carried weight. Resentment that he brought media attention, that he had swagger, that he didn't have to play the humble second-stringer game. But here's the problem. Shedeur never asked for the spotlight. He inherited it, and the way he's handled it, with discipline, patience, and grace. The very qualities Gabriel lacked when the lights turned on. This wasn't just a training camp fight. It was a referendum on how leadership is perceived in today's NFL. For years, the league has romanticized the rah-rah guys, the screamers, the field generals who pound their chests. But the game's changing. Leadership now looks more like Shedeur and less like a hype reel. It's about presence, not volume. And for the Browns, this wasn't just drama. It was revelation. It revealed how fragile their QB depth was, how quickly the massive control can slip when ego meets pressure, and most of all, how ready Shedeur is for this moment, even when the organization hasn't always acted like they deserve him. Because make no mistake, this locker room clash didn't happen in a vacuum. It happened under the weight of months of media speculation, internal dysfunction, and organizational tone deafness. Haslam's public distancing from Shedeur, the weird front office politics, the lack of clarity around the starting role. It all set the stage for someone like Gabriel to spiral. But what none of them anticipated was that Shedeur would come out of the chaos looking even stronger. By the end of that week, reports were already surfacing that Shedeur would get the start in the preseason opener. Coaches didn't say much, but they didn't have to. The team had already made their decision. And in the NFL, the team always knows first. Gabriel's name will probably fade from the headlines soon enough. A footnote in another messy quarterback battle. Maybe he gets picked up as a backup somewhere. Maybe he doesn't. But what people will remember is how Shedeur Sanders handled a direct attack with silence, strength, and subtle dominance. That's the kind of thing that doesn't show up on stat sheets. But it wins games. And more importantly, it wins locker rooms. For the Browns, this could be the turning point they didn't know they needed. Because sometimes leadership doesn't emerge from press conferences or draft picks. Sometimes it emerges in the middle of a meltdown, when the guy everyone's watching shows him exactly who he is by not flinching. What happened on that training field wasn't just a heated exchange between two quarterbacks. It was a mirror held up to the Browns' entire organizational philosophy. And for the first time in a long time, the reflection staring back looked real, raw, unfiltered, and way past due. Dillon Gabriel's emotional spiral didn't come out of nowhere. It was the kind of breakdown that builds slowly, day by day, rep by rep, until the pressure becomes unbearable. You could practically chart it. Every missed throw, every misread, every subtle nod Shedeur got from the coaching staff chipped away at Gabriel's confidence. And what makes it so fascinating, and honestly a little tragic, is that this wasn't about just football. It was about identity, legacy, and the creeping awareness that the narrative had started to shift, and not in his favor. For the first few days of camp, Gabriel was locked in, controlled, vocal, professional. But once Shedeur started to gain momentum, the unraveling began. Teammates noticed. Receivers began warming up with Shedeur even when they weren't assigned. Defensive veterans started chatting with him more during downtime. Coaches lingered just a little longer after Shedeur's reps. It wasn't favoritism. It was respect. The kind that builds when you see a guy walk into a storm and not flinch. For Gabriel, who'd been operating under the assumption that he was a safer, more NFL-ready option, that shift wasn't just uncomfortable, it was destabilizing. And the deeper the reps went, the more the emotional cracks started to show. Frustration after drills, snapping at assistants, subtle eye rolls in the film room. This wasn't just about wanting to win the job. It was about realizing he was losing it and that he didn't know how to stop it. By the time the outburst happened, midway through a 7-on-7 set, it felt less like a shock and more like a storm finally breaking. When Gabriel barked that Shedeur hadn't earned this H*T, the field froze not because of what he said, but because of how he said it. You could hear the fatigue, the fear, the helplessness. It was less an accusation and more of a surrender. And Shedeur, the man at the center of the chaos, he didn't flinch. Not once. That moment, when he stood calm while another grown man publicly tried to tear him down, was the unofficial start of the Sanders era in Cleveland. Because it wasn't just what Shedeur did. It was what he didn't do. He didn't yell. He didn't posture. He didn't retaliate. He just stood still, a slow breath, a small shake of the head. And then he stepped back into the huddle like nothing happened. It was clinical and devastating. Because in that second, Shedeur didn't just win the respect of the locker room. He redefined what leadership looked like for the Browns. This wasn't about talent anymore. It wasn't even about experience. It was about composure. The kind of composure that tells grown men in a high-stakes environment, you can trust me when it gets dark. After that, everything changed. Veterans on the offensive line, many of whom had been quietly indifferent through the early stages of camp, started speaking up publicly in support of Shedeur. Linebackers and corners, who usually stay out of quarterback drama, started giving him nods during walk-throughs. A few even approached him after practice to dap him up. Subtle gestures that carry huge weight in locker room politics. The quarterback room, once seen as a murky mess of politics and potential, suddenly had clarity. Gabriel, now isolated and visibly rattled, started taking mental reps on the sidelines, far removed from the leadership dynamic he once assumed he owned. And if you think this was just a temporary mood swing, think again. This wasn't a mood. This was a moment when the team realized what they had in Shedeur, not just a quarterback, but a tone setter, a cultural anchor, the kind of guy whose presence demands accountability, without needing to scream it. And that is the exact leadership vacuum the Browns have been trying to fill for years. The franchise has been plagued with instability under center, from half-baked rookies to overpriced veterans, cycling through faces of the franchise like a confused casting director. For a team with so much raw talent on both sides of the ball, what they lacked, screamed for, was emotional consistency. Someone who could withstand internal dysfunction, media noise, and performance pressure all at once. Someone who didn't make it about them. Shedeur, despite the fame and spotlight and larger-than-life father, made it clear in that moment. This is about football, not narrative, not branding, not ego. Gabriel's meltdown only amplified that contrast. His inability to channel frustration productively, especially when his performance had already been slipping, exposed his fragility in the face of competition. Because let's be honest, if a quarterback can't handle a rep shuffle in training camp, how's he going to handle a 2-minute drill in a playoff game with 70,000 fans screaming for blood? The team saw it. The staff saw it. And worst of all for Gabriel, he saw it. And as news of the incident spread, front office executives had no choice but to reevaluate the quarterback room from the top down. Suddenly, Gabriel wasn't just the emotional guy who blew up. He was a liability in a room that needed maturity. Trade rumors started circling within days. Teams looking for backup depth poked around. Nothing confirmed. But let's just say Gabriel's reps with Cleveland are effectively done. That's the crazy part of all this. One emotional outburst, 30 seconds of ego spilling into daylight, can undo years of preparation if you do it in the wrong room, in front of the wrong eyes, against the wrong man. Shedeur didn't win the starting role that day because of one meltdown. He won it because he showed, without saying a word, that he was already carrying himself like a starter. And the Browns? For once, they didn't try to fight the energy. They leaned into it. Offensive coordinator meetings started shifting toward building packages around Shedeur's strengths. Receiver reps were reshuffled to sync up better with his rhythm. And most telling of all, one of the team's veteran captains reportedly told a position coach He's our guy now. Everyone knows it. That's the kind of organic shift you can't manufacture. It only happens when a team feels something. And what they felt that day wasn't just the fall of Dillon Gabriel. It was a rise of a new leader who didn't have to yell to lead, didn't have to dominate the headlines to dominate the locker room. He just had to be. This confrontation didn't just reshape the quarterback competition. It recalibrated the Browns' identity. For a franchise that's long been defined by chaos, reaction, and short-term fixes, this moment offered something rare: clarity. A player who isn't just playing for himself, but for the team. A player who knows the weight of expectations and still chooses to carry them. The irony? The same organization that had publicly questioned whether Shedeur was even wanted in the first place is now quietly reshaping their entire offensive strategy around him. That's how quickly the script can flip in the NFL. But let's not get it twisted. This wasn't luck. This was an accident. This was years of preparation, internal discipline, and quiet confidence meeting the moment perfectly. And it wasn't just a win for Shedeur, it was a win for the Browns. A sign that maybe, just maybe, they're finally moving in a direction that isn't dictated by panic. There's something poetic about how quickly a team can shift its allegiance. 1 minute, Dillon Gabriel was a presumed leader in the quarterback room, the safe bet. The next, he was a cautionary tale. Not because he lacked talent, but because he couldn't withstand the very pressure that defines the position. The quarterback isn't just another player on the field. He's the emotional thermostat of the entire team. When the quarterback panics, the offense short-circuits. When he's rattled, the line loses confidence. When he crumbles, it spreads like a virus, infecting morale, performance, and trust. Gabriel didn't just lose his temper. He lost the room. In contrast, Shedeur Sanders didn't win by being flashy or defiant. He won by being still. His reaction to Gabriel's blow-up wasn't passive. It was strategic. He understood the moment. He let Gabriel spiral. And by doing nothing, he said everything. And that's the difference between someone trying to be the guy and someone who is the guy. After the incident, practice resumed like it always does. Whistles blew. Cleats pounded turf. Coaches yelled across drills. But the vibe? It was different. Shedeur's next rep was met with subtle, unmistakable intensity. Receivers running routes sharper, linemen holding blocks longer, and a huddle that leaned in closer. There was a sense of unity, like everyone had just chosen a side, and that side had already moved on. Even more telling was how the coaching staff responded. There were no loud statements, no dramatic benchings. But Shedeur's reps suddenly got longer. He was trusted with more play action, more red zone scenarios. The quarterback whispers and analysts might point to subtle technique tweaks, but the real change was emotional, psychological. The team was shifting from experimentation to investment. Behind closed doors, the staff started discussing leadership reps, not just on the field, but off it. Media responsibilities, locker room management, mentorship pairings, all the subtle, unspoken responsibilities that fall on a franchise quarterback. And Shedeur was the name being mentioned. Gabriel, meanwhile, was reportedly being handled with care, which is code for, we're trying to find a quiet way out. It's not personal, but it is final, and in a way, it's understandable. Gabriel had probably worked his entire life for this opportunity. But the NFL doesn't wait. It doesn't forgive. And it certainly doesn't forget when a quarterback loses control. One incident can derail a career. Not because of talent, but because of perception. And perception in the NFL is everything. As for Shedeur, he now stands at the beginning of something much bigger than a training camp promotion. He's stepping into the legacy spotlight, not just as Deion Sanders' son, but as his own man, a quarterback whose leadership, poise, and quiet dominance have begun to reshape the Browns from the inside out. It's still early. The season hasn't started. Mistakes will come. Adversity is guaranteed. But when the team needed a leader, amid chaos, conflict, and raw human ego, Shedeur didn't flinch. And that's when the Browns knew they weren't just looking at their future starter. They were looking at their new identity.